Welcome in, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. If you're the kind of person who likes to cut right through the noise and get straight to the facts, well, you found exactly the right explainer. Today, we're taking a completely unbiased, clear-cut journey through 15 massive global headlines that just broke on August 17th. We are literally taking the incredibly complex web of today's news and boiling it down into a tight, focused narrative just for you. So let's go ahead and dive right in to see exactly how the world shifted today.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap. We've grouped today's events into 5 main pillars. We're going to kick things off at the macro level with alliances and global flashpoints, then we'll move through the Russo-Ukrainian war, natural disasters and global relief, Asian markets and political shifts, and finally we'll round it out with diplomacy, tragedies, and landmark trials.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Alliances and Global Flashpoints. It is fascinating to see the direct cause and effect in international military postures. Right now, U.S. President Donald Trump has officially directed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to scale back the Olchi Freedom Shield military drills with South Korea. Now, normally these exercises run for 11 days. The reasoning behind pulling back is actually twofold. First, President Trump specifically cited his relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And second, the administration voiced frustration after Seoul formally declined to pitch in on U.S. military operations involving Iran. It just goes to show how a decision made in the Middle East can immediately ripple out and impact a massive, long-standing defense alliance over in East Asia.
And you know, speaking of the Middle East, we are seeing a seriously escalating crisis in the region. In some recent public remarks about naval operations, President Trump actually threatened direct military action against targets in Oman. But at the exact same time, he downplayed the ongoing concerns about deploying the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. So you have this intense combination of threatened strikes on one hand and highly managed deployment messaging on the other, which really underscores just how volatile this moment is in the ongoing Hormuz crisis.
Let's shift gears and move across the globe for a second to define a term you absolutely need to know: the first island chain. This is a strategic string of archipelagos in the Pacific Ocean that operates as a primary defense boundary. Now, why are we talking about this today? Well, Taiwan's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lin Jialong, just did an interview with the BBC, where he explicitly urged the democracies along this first island chain to really deepen their defense cooperation. He's pointing straight at regional security threats, U.S. defense burden-sharing policies, and arms sales, and he's essentially calling for a unified, heavily fortified boundary in the Indo-Pacific.
To wrap up our look at global flashpoints, we're turning to some heavy domestic political tensions over in Africa. Right after the recent elections in Lusaka, Zambia, security forces carried out raids that ended up seizing a number of weapons. Because of this, authorities have arrested 11 people over what they're calling an alleged post-election insurrection plot. And what makes this incredibly significant is that a leading opposition presidential candidate, Brian Mundubil, is actually among those who are detained.
Moving on to Section 2, the Russo-Ukrainian war escalates. We are seeing a deeply reciprocal tit-for-tat dynamic playing out in this conflict right now. On one side, Ukraine's general staff put out satellite imagery confirming their long-range strikes successfully hit and damaged the Kamensky chemical plant, which is an explosives facility over in Russia's Rostov Oblast. But right in parallel with that, Russian forces have unleashed a renewed wave of targeted attacks specifically designed to cripple Ukrainian energy infrastructure. It is a really stark example of how both sides are aggressively going after critical infrastructure to weaken the other's ability to operate. And we have to remember, this conflict does not just happen in a vacuum. Moldova's Ministry of Defense just confirmed that debris from a Russian loitering munition crashed and actually exploded near their border village of Talmaza. This is hard, objective evidence of the severe, escalating air risks that this war poses to neighboring nations who are otherwise completely neutral. That spillover effect? It is a very real, tangible threat in the region right now.
Let's transition into Section 3, Natural Disasters and Global Relief.
This number represents a truly profound human tragedy. Following a massive 7.7 magnitude earthquake off Flores Island in Indonesia, the confirmed death toll has tragically climbed to over 60 people.
To really grasp what's happening on Flores Island, we have to look past just that initial number. Search and rescue teams are out there right now, but their operations are being severely hampered by literally hundreds of ongoing aftershocks. Plus, we've got more than 5,000 residents who have been totally displaced from their homes. They're making do in temporary shelters, and there are reports of severe food shortages. The survival conditions on the ground there are just incredibly challenging at this moment.
But, in the wake of these kinds of disasters, we also see the very best of international cooperation. Halfway across the world, Colombia was just hit by its own severe 7.4 magnitude earthquake,
And in response, Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs immediately stepped up and dispatched vital emergency supplies. They sent over a relief package packed with water purifiers, medical gear, and temporary shelters. It's a critical lifeline of global support when it's needed most.
Now, all of this brings us to a really important intersection. We've talked about military conflicts, we've talked about natural disasters, but how are all these massive global disruptions actually trickling down to impact regional economies and ultimately your wallet? Well, let's take a look. This brings us to Section 4, Asian markets and political shifts. So 1.1%. That represents Japan's annualized GDP growth rate for the April to June quarter based on the latest government data. Now, at first glance, positive growth sounds great, right? But analysts are pointing out a very specific weak spot here: private consumption. And this ties perfectly back to what we were talking about earlier. Why is consumption weak? It's directly because of rising energy import costs driven by those exact Middle East disruptions and the Hormuz crisis we just unpacked. It just shows you that absolutely everything is connected.
Japan is also making some massive moves regarding its future defense capabilities. Their Ministry of Defense just outlined plans to directly integrate U.S.-developed artificial intelligence platforms into its self-defense forces. The big goal here is to completely modernize their command and control operations. We're talking about utilizing AI for automated battlefield analysis and target evaluation. This is a huge technological leap.
Meanwhile, over in China, the focus right now is highly domestic and looking back at history. Chinese President Xi Jinping gave a major address marking the 100th anniversary of the birth of former leader Jiang Zemin. During this speech, President Xi praised Jiang Zemin's historical economic reforms, but more importantly, he used the moment to heavily emphasize and really demand party unity as the country gears up for its future leadership congresses.
And that brings us to our final segment, Section 5, Diplomacy, Tragedies, and Landmark Trials.
Let's run through these major developments real quick. First up, in the world of diplomacy, U.S. negotiator Jared Kushner is right in the thick of high-level ceasefire proposals, meeting first with Hamas representatives in Egypt and then directly with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Next, there is a truly heartbreaking tragedy out of Bihar, India. At the Ashok Dam Temple, massive holiday crowds triggered a fatal stampede that left at least 7 worshippers dead and dozens more injured. And finally, we have 2 massive legal stories in the U.S. involving Luigi Mangione and the legendary Tupac Shakur. Let's break those 2 down.
To really understand the delay in the Luigi Mangione murder case, we need to talk about double jeopardy. It's a fundamental constitutional protection that basically stops an individual from being tried twice for the exact same offense. In a U.S. state court, the judge was actually forced to indefinitely postpone Mangione's murder trial, specifically so they could iron out some highly complex double jeopardy motions that the defense counsel filed.
And for our last story, we are witnessing a true landmark cultural and legal moment. Decades after that fatal 1996 drive-by shooting in Las Vegas, the wheels of justice are finally turning in Nevada State Court. Both the prosecution and defense attorneys have officially delivered their opening statements in the incredibly long-awaited trial regarding the murder of iconic rapper Tupac Shakur.
Okay, let's pull back for a second and look at the big picture. What are the absolute critical takeaways from today's explainer? Well, first, shifting U.S. military postures are deeply intertwined. A decision not to help out with Iran literally forces a reduction in military drills over in South Korea. Second, the Russo-Ukrainian conflict is escalating through highly calculated, tit-for-tat strikes on infrastructure, and we're seeing that danger physically spill over into neutral territory. And third, macro geopolitical crises in one hemisphere, like what's happening in the Middle East, can directly drag down regional economic growth and private consumption in places like Japan. It really proves that the entire world operates in one massive connected ecosystem.
And that officially wraps up our explainer for today. I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to chew on. As all of these strategic boundaries and economic dependencies continue to collide, which of these shifting alliances do you think is going to be the one to shape tomorrow's headlines? Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep asking those big questions.